Hey everyone, so One Piece chapter 1107 just came out, and this was a phenomenal chapter that gave us pretty much everything that we could have asked for in a single One Piece chapter. I mean, between Luffy's moment against Saturn, Sanji's moment against Kizaru, and the Blackbeard Pirates coming out of left field for, I would say, the best moment of the chapter, particularly with Van Auger's line. I think we've got a lot to unpack here. This was basically the takeoff point, in my opinion, for Egghead Island's climax to really go to the next level. Because now we're at the point where all the big fights are really rolling, and we've got the plot twists that are going to be coming back to back, like the Blackbeard Pirates, that payoff. We're going to probably find out what's going to happen with the ancient robot very soon. All of the question marks, like what's going to go on with Kizaru's character, I think those are going to be answered back to back to back in the next, 10 or so chapters, because I think we're fast approaching a conclusion, but there's still clearly a lot of surprises left. I mean, I don't know if we can even accurately at this point predict what the final matchups of this arc are going to be. It was kind of shaping up over the last couple chapters, but I think they can still be swapped around a little bit. So, let's start with Sanji, because I feel like Sanji was the character that probably benefited the most from this chapter, and I think just in general the Egghead Island arc, because we all know that people tend to downplay Sanji pretty frequently, but the reality is that Oda is never taking this man out of the monster trio. He is always going to be, whether you like it or not, he's always going to be right there with Luffy and Zoro in terms of importance. And this chapter, no matter how you spin it, for the first time in a long time, he clearly was the highlight of the chapter. He's the highlight of Egghead Island right now, and he looks better than Zoro, who is currently taking a certain amount of time against Lucci that I think most hardcore Zoro fans never believed that he would require in order to dispose of this opponent. So I will leave it at that. It's up to you guys to discuss and debate how much Zoro is struggling. I would love to see if it's a bit more, I would love to see something a bit more clear as an indicator as to whether Advanced Conqueror's Haki is being used or not. But come on, man, it's time to wrap it up, because during the span of time that Zoro versus Lucci has been going on, Luffy versus Kizaru, that whole fight happened, ended, Luffy ran out of gear 5th, went into starvation mode, got fed food, ran off, ate a bunch more food from Vegapunk's food producing machine, went into a food coma, then came back to full health, and has proceeded to pummel Saturn. So all of that has happened in the span of time that Zoro's been fighting Lucci. So it's about time to wrap it up. The good news is, for Zoro fans, I do think that there is another fight around the corner for Zoro, because I personally think that we might be getting to see Zoro and Sanji versus Kizaru before the end of all of this. Reason I say that is because, well, first of all, let's heap some praise on Sanji, because the moment that he got this chapter was, I remember last chapter, a lot of people debating, did Sanji block a laser with his foot? What exactly happened there? Did he get injured? This chapter, Sanji's eyebrow is flipped, his durability is through the roof, it's at, absolute maximum capacity. This dude cannot be pierced by lasers, right? Sanji so far, the durability feats that we've seen, tanking a Seraphim S-Shark punch, that was huge. But this moment, where it's clear that even Kizaru's lasers, which historically throughout the series are not really blocked or deflected by characters. Characters usually avoid them, or they have their own sort of hacks abilities to deal with them. For example, Luffy swallowing Kizaru's laser, Marco being able to take it and regenerate with his Phoenix Flames. But in general, we've seen Whitebeard get pierced by Kizaru's lasers during Marineford. They are very, very deadly weapons. There's a reason that Vegapunk chose to use that as the model to replicate over and over for the Pacifistas, because it's just nearly unstoppable, as we've seen throughout One Piece, except for Sanji. So Sanji straight up kicked a laser. You can see the shock on Kizaru's face, so this is not a normal thing that characters do. He's not used to characters doing that, and Kizaru very often goes up against characters with very strong haki, we can imagine. So this is major, major, major points for Sanji right here. He also got a pretty good line, a pretty badass line in response to what Kizaru's comments were about how he needs to take these guys in. This fight seems well set up. That being said, it seems as though Luffy's opponent is going to be Saturn, which I think a lot of us guessed, as Saturn is kind of being painted as the big bad of this arc, even over Kizaru. So with Luffy occupied against Saturn, I don't know if we're going to get Sanji versus Kizaru from now till the end of the arc. I don't know if Sanji, this is no disrespect to the character. I think that most Yonko first mates can't hold out 1v1 against Kizaru on their own for an extended period of time. So I wouldn't be surprised if the way it's looking, Zoro versus Lucci is supposed to wrap up somewhat soon. I wouldn't be, maybe with Jinbei's help, maybe with Jinbei's assistance, I'm sure that Jinbei will be contributing in some way. I wouldn't be surprised, though, if we do get to see soon enough Zoro and Sanji getting to go up against Kizaru. I think that that would be a beautiful scenario, getting to see Luffy versus Saturn on one side, and his two wings, Zoro and Sanji, up against the Marine Admiral Kizaru on the other side. I just think that that would be just such an awesome scenario for the Monster Trio to cap off this arc. The only thing I could really ask for beyond that is just for any of the other Straw Hats to be moderately useful or have some sort of role besides being basically NPCs for this arc. Franky at the very least, please. Something for Franky, please. Besides that, though, nothing more I could ask for from the fight so far. Luffy with the Saturn moment, I did think that it was cool to finally see Luffy be the one to hit Saturn. That's the second Celestial Dragon that Luffy's hit. There were discussions about Luffy's reactions to Vegapunk, the fact that Luffy's laughing and clearly still having a good time, and his friend is bleeding out to death, and Luffy's still, like, clearly in a very good mood, and he's finding things funny. He's not laughing at Vegapunk, obviously, but it doesn't really matter if he's laughing at Vegapunk or not. The reality is, like, if your friend is bleeding out on the floor, you probably have a different sort of demeanor than just, like, laughing and finding, just general life funny or whatever you want to say. The simple truth is that the Luffy of old would not be acting like this. That's just the reality of it. You cannot find a comparable scene in One Piece where Luffy's friend would be injured on the ground and Luffy's just in a good, giggly mood. It's just not a thing. So this goes back to a video that I encourage people to watch because I think it's very, very relevant to right now. I wish I'd saved it for this week because it's even more relevant now, but just the video I just dropped about Gear 5th and tension. It is relevant to the rest of the story. I broke down kind of why a lot of discussions around the, whether Gear 5th changes tone, is it okay that it changes tone, was Luffy always like this, etc. Why a lot of these arguments are flawed, and the real things that sort of matter from here to the end of the story. But with this chapter, with us even seeing that even with Vegapunk like dying in front of his eyes, Luffy's still kind of in a good, jolly, laughing mood, that does, for me, for the first time in a long time, it does raise some concerns regarding Gear 5th for me and how it can be written, because I mean there were memes going around before of like Luffy in serious situations in the past with his eyes popping out, and everyone was like, these are just memes, this is not actually how Luffy would react. Yes, it is. Apparently it is. This is how Gear 5th Luffy would react. He will be his eyes will be popping out, he'll be laughing. It's just the way it is. He did get a little bit serious against Saturn, put on a serious face for a moment before he went back to laughing, so that's a sign like maybe there's something more that we can get out of Gear 5th. Just waiting for the next chapter, next couple chapters. So encourage people to watch that video for sure. Does Gear 5th, how does Gear 5th affect tension? I think it's very, very relevant to right now. But the highlight of this chapter was not Luffy, it was not Sanji, it was kind of Sanji. But let's say the thing that will probably stick out for me the most in the long run is the Blackbeard Pirates moment. So, the ramifications of Katarina Devon gaining the ability to impersonate Saturn, that is something I'm not going to discuss here because the video that's coming out this Tuesday is a very in-depth breakdown of what it seems like Blackbeard's grand master plan is for the story of One Piece. The grand master plan. So I'm going to be breaking that down in next week's video. In terms of just what I want to talk about today, I think that this chapter did wonders for the general excitement that I feel towards the Blackbeard Pirates. Because the Hachinosu raid, and I talked about this in stream earlier, it did not make them seem that intimidating or that competent in the grand scheme of things, because at the end of the day, it's the entire crew practically all trying to fight against just Garp, and they're struggling. They're being shrugged off like flies. Garp's really, his main focus is Aokiji, who's not even a true member of the Blackbeard Pirates necessarily. I mean, by the end of the Hachinosu raid, Kobe was flexing on them. So this chapter, I felt, was very, very important just to establishing that, look, these guys, they're on the come up. You have to watch out for them because even if the world government seems like the main threats right now, I don't know, these Blackbeard Pirates, they're coming. They're coming for, as Van Augur said, in one of the most badass lines that the Blackbeard Pirates have ever uttered outside of Blackbeard himself, what do they want? The world. And Van Augur, by the way, if you go back through the story, he has a history of talking in this sort of grand way. He's the one that talks about the crossroads of fate and destiny. He talks about that during the Ace battle. He talks a lot about fate in the towards the end of Jaya. Van Augur is a very, very, I suppose, philosophical and dark character when you actually start picking apart a lot of his dialogue. So he's set to be one of the most interesting Blackbeard Pirates for sure, and he already is. I'd say, in my opinion, he and Lafitte are the most interesting Blackbeard Pirates so far to me. So Great stuff from Van Augur, speaking of which we don't know where Lafitte is, but to me this was kind of just a really cool face-to-face moment, because you've got two big bads, right? You've got the Gorosei and Imu, you got the Blackbeard pirates, right? These are the two that we're staring down heading into the end of the story. We don't know for sure yet who is the final group of villains, but to see the Blackbeard pirates come face to face with the Gorosei, and they're the ones that kind of get the one up on the Gorosei, and they basically send a message that we're going to be a problem down the road. We're coming for what you guys have. That's very, very, very exciting. And it also just adds so much unpredictability to the general final conflict of One Piece, period. Like, the fact that we're this deep in the story, into the final saga, and there are two groups, two characters, Imu and Blackbeard, two groups, Gorosei and the Blackbeard pirates, who could potentially be the final villains of the story, and we still don't know for sure which is which, and yet at the same time, either one of them would be perfectly fitting with the narrative so far, because the narrative has been built in a way that either one of them works and would fit with the ideas and the themes and the symbolism of the story. That is just masterful writing to keep it so unpredictable all the way down the home stretch. Cannot give enough props to that. So major hats off for the way the Blackbeard pirates were written in this chapter, and yeah, just looking forward to the big fights coming around the corner. But before I sign off, there's an interesting point made by one of my top tier patrons in the Voice of the People. So Stephen Bracano says, it seems clear that Teach's desire to conquer the world is very literally aiming to become king of the world, just like Rocks. This falls in line with him outdoing Luffy, which means Teach will literally steal the seat of the final villain from Imu on a meta level as he steals the throne. The ultimate pirate move both in universe and narratively. Listen, Steven, I was initially, way back when, sold on the idea of Blackbeard being the final villain. In my first Blackbeard analysis that I did of why Blackbeard is a necessary evil, I kind of painted out why it makes so much sense for Blackbeard to be the one to ultimately be the final villain of the story. Because ultimately, it's a story about pirates, it's about inheriting the will of D, it's not just about toppling the world government, but about who can define what the new age after that can be. So it sets up a really, really powerful finale, potentially, of Imu being defeated, Gorosei Celestial Dragons being torn down, and then Blackbeard potentially trying to push for his new age and Luffy standing against him as the one fighting for the Dawn instead. I still think that's possible. I think there's an uphill battle because Imu and the Gorosei and the Celestial Dragons and the Holy Knights and the Marines, they're taking up so much space as the main threat in the story right now that it's going to be very difficult for the Blackbeard pirates to supplant them. But I still think that my original belief that Blackbeard can and should be the final villain, I still think that that's actually a possibility now. And with this latest chapter, I don't know, it's beginning to grow on me again. I'm beginning to shift back to believing what I originally believed, that Blackbeard will be the final villain. I'm not going to sit here and say that it's definite, but I like the way you phrased it, that Blackbeard in the ultimate pirate move, he's going to steal the role of final villain right from out under Imu's feet. He can be the one sitting on the throne at the end, and he could be the one that Luffy ultimately has to defeat to bring the Dawn and save the world. So I'm 100% open to that idea. I welcome the idea of Blackbeard as the final villain. Let's just see how it goes. So that's all for this week, and I will talk to you all later.